All right, so we'll get into the session now. So our agenda for the day is that I will give an overview of the North American Language and Culture Assistance Program in Spain. I'll talk about some of the benefits of the program. Then I'll get into what a typical day for an auxiliar is, which is the name of being a teaching assistant in Spain. So I'll be referring to that. And then I'll be getting into my own experience back when I participated in the program. And then we also have a current auxiliar, Phil Schultz, who is joining us today, and he'll talk a little bit about his experience and answer any questions you might have. He's here at a pretty unique time. He's in Spain at a pretty unique time, of course. So he will discuss how life is as an auxiliar during COVID. And we'll talk about some other COVID-19 impacts as well. And then we'll finish with a Q&A. All right. So what is this program? So it's a program that is run by the Spanish government, the Spanish Ministry of Education, and you are a teaching assistant specifically. So you won't be the lead teacher. So you'll be a teaching assistant in a primary or secondary public school in Spain. And as an assistant, you will be in the classroom with a native Spanish lead teacher at all times. You are not responsible for things like grading or disciplining, or at least you shouldn't be responsible for that. No teaching certificate is required for participation in this program, and I'll get into eligibility requirements in the next slide. It runs for an entire academic year. If you're placed in Madrid, it's from October 1st to June 30th. And then if you're placed in regions outside of Madrid, it's for 1 month less, so October 1st to May 31st. You work 16 hours a week if you're in Madrid and 12 hours a week if you're in other regions. So we'll get to this later, but there is a ton of free time. So we can talk about different things that typical auxiliaries do or things that you can do. And your work schedule is 4 days a week. So you'd work either Monday through Thursday or Tuesday through Friday. So you'll always have 3-day weekends and sometimes more if there are holidays. Okay. So who's eligible? Pretty flexible eligibility requirements. You need to be a US or Canadian citizen and a native English speaker. You need to have a bachelor's degree by the time the program begins, and it does not matter what type of degree you have. It doesn't have to be an education degree. It can be, I was a history major, for example, and you can pretty much, just have a bachelor's degree to be eligible. They will say that a basic proficiency of Spanish is required, which is highly recommended. I know plenty of people who did not have even a basic proficiency of Spanish who joined the program. Of course, it's recommended for getting around in everyday life. I would just say it would be helpful to at least have a genuine interest in learning Spanish if you don't think you even have a basic proficiency. One thing that I also want to mention, and this is what the Spanish Ministry of Education wants to stress, is that when you're in the classroom, it's important that your students don't know that you can speak or understand Spanish if you do, because the government wants these students to be fully immersed in English, and they don't want, if they know that you know Spanish, then that's all they will speak to you, especially if you're in like a primary or elementary school. So, of course, it depends on what level the school you're in, like what, I guess, proficiency level. But for the most part, or I guess from my experience, like I had to sometimes speak to students in Spanish, or at least let them know that I understood them because I taught in an elementary school, and I'll get to that later. Okay. So where can you teach? I've mentioned that there are differences between Madrid and not Madrid. So you can teach in most regions of Spain. And Phil, if you don't mind, could you chime in and let me know what regions you can't? I believe Catalonia is one, which is where Barcelona is located. Any other ones?
I've heard that I think Galicia and possibly País Vasco, though they're still on the application, but you can't be placed there, is what is my understanding.
Gotcha. Yeah, thanks. So in the northwest is Galicia, in north central is the Basque Country or País Vasco, and then in the northeast is Catalonia. It's probably unlikely. Like Phil mentioned, they may be an option on the application, but it's worth noting that those regions have an official language, like Basque, Galician, and Catalonian are official languages that are different than like Castilian Spanish. So like the I guess most common Spanish that is spoken. So that might be a reason why. And Valencia also has its own language. So that could be another region where maybe you can't get placed in anymore. But I'm not 100% sure about that one. You can be placed in like in the heart of the city or in a more rural area or a suburb, like a suburb. Placements can vary throughout all of Spain. I was in Madrid, in proper Madrid, but more on the outskirts. So it was kind of like it was technically the city of Madrid, but it was much, much different than the city. Of course, there are pros and cons of living in a city versus living outside of city, which I'll get to later. And then on the application, you can give your top 3 regional preferences. So, and basically there are 17 autonomous communities in Spain, which are kind of like provinces. And, they're in this map, they're clearly outlined. So you would give your top 3 in those particular regions. I actually had Andalusia as my top preference and Madrid was my second. So I got my second option, but that's probably because I applied much later. So just know that you may not always get your first choice. And then you can also choose your school level preference. So whether or not you want to teach, at a primary or secondary level. And just a little bit more about the application. You can go to the next slide, Kelly. So it is entirely in Spanish. So just know that that if you don't have a high level of Spanish, it can be a little bit challenging to figure it out. At the International Center, we can definitely help answer any questions you might have. This is new that I discovered, but a statement of purpose is required. It used to be allowed to be in Spanish or English, but now it specifically states that the statement of purpose must be in English, and they probably just want to make sure that you do in fact have a high proficiency, English proficiency level. A couple other notable things you need to include in an application is a letter of recommendation. This doesn't necessarily have to be from, a university professor, but I think that would probably be the strongest, whether it's a GSI or a professor, someone you have a close relationship with, especially if you've taken any Spanish courses at U of M. But other people have chosen employers as well. So it doesn't necessarily have to be someone in a university setting. You also need to include either your diploma or transcript to prove that you did in fact graduate and have a bachelor's degree. There is a link below, or on the last bullet, that gives instructions on how to apply in English and common FAQs that applicants have asked. Is there anything else, Phil, that you want to mention about the application?
No, I think you covered everything for the application. I just wanted to mention, I did it all on my own. You can go through like a third party that will help you with the application. There's a couple of different companies. They were kind of expensive for me, so I just decided to do it myself, and I had no issues even this past year with COVID. It kind of slowed things down a bit, but the hardest part was once I was accepted, getting you have to get some documents authenticated by the Department of State. So that was the hardest thing for me, but that wasn't until after I got accepted and was planning to get my visa. So I would just say, if you apply and are accepted, to kind of know what's required, and that took more planning for me, that getting the visa. But I think you covered everything with the application.
Cool. All right. Yeah. And visa help is something that the International Center can provide advising on. We can't get the visa ourselves, but we can definitely help you out and put you in touch with those who can, help best. So that is a service that we provide. All right. And then I'll get into some of the benefits of the program. Yes. So it is a paid job. If you are placed in Madrid, you get €1,000 a month, and then other regions get €700 a month. That is just because of cost of living in Madrid is higher than other regions of Spain, at least the other regions that where there are placements. Unlike other teach abroad programs that might include like housing or the flight over or things like that, that is not included. So you will have to pay for your own housing, your own food, the flight over. So things like that. So you're kind of on your own to do that. And that's kind of reflected in, the 12 to 16 hours a week and 4-day work weeks. So that's why. However, since you do have so much additional time outside of school, it's very common to give private lessons after school. I'm not sure how common this is right now, if private lessons are possible or common, I guess. But typically you can make an additional 15 to 20 euros per hour. At least that was the going rate in Madrid at the time I was there. So that's, just an additional way to make money. Another benefit, of course, is it's an incredibly immersive experience. I'll get into, Madrid versus not Madrid in terms of immersion in a couple slides, but you're living in another country. Homestays aren't an option, but you can live with locals or other Americans. But you're completely immersed in a culture. Whether or not you'll be in a city or in a more rural area might affect the level of immersion. I went in. I took Spanish at U of M when I was an undergrad, just to fulfill my language requirement, and I would say my skill level of Spanish was pretty low when I started, and I was there for 2 years, and I was I was at a like, at least for me, I was at a pretty high level at the end of my second year. So it's kind of more, however much it can be as immersive as you want it to be, if you want to put yourself in the situation to, meet others and not hang out with Americans, and or not hang out with Americans all the time. Okay, next. So yeah, I mean, it's a completely independent experience. For me, it was an incredible experience after I graduated from college and then wasn't sure what to do next. So, I was in Madrid, so I learned how to navigate a completely new city in a different language. I didn't know anyone in that city. I learned to budget, live on my own, do things. So, it was kind of like a nice stepping stone from being in college, to I guess in between college and starting like a typical work life. So that was really important for my own personal growth, I would say. Of course, a huge perk is that you're in Western Europe and and travel is very affordable and accessible there. Of course, during COVID, it's a little bit different. I'll probably be saying that a lot. But also, since you'll have so much free time, there is a lot of additional time to explore the city you're living in, or explore the region you're in, or pursue other interests. I personally volunteered at a museum, and also joined a basketball league in Spain. A lot of people played soccer. A lot of people pursued a music career, because that was their number one passion. So you if you do decide to join this program, you'll find that a lot of the people who do join specifically because they're interested in Spanish culture and want to improve their Spanish speaking skills. But there also is a number of people who just wanted to do something new, or like have time to make money and travel and explore other interests that they might have. For example, there was even one person who was an actual lawyer. She had already passed the bar in practice for a couple of years, and she just wanted to take the year off and teach and travel for a year. So you'll meet a wide variety of people who are interested in this particular program. And then another benefit of this program is exposure to different career fields, which is something that benefited me a lot personally, because I was a history major and thought I would go to grad school for history after the Teach in Spain program. And this exposed me to international education, and I completely changed my career path because of this experience. So, and I know plenty of people who also had their career path changed specifically because of this experience. Okay. So you heard Phil mention that there are a couple different programs for teaching in Spain. Some are through a third-party provider. The most well-known one is CIEE. And I just kind of want to highlight the differences between going directly through the Spanish government-run program and through a third-party provider. So for me, the biggest difference was the cost. The Spanish government program is free. The CIEE program is $2,200. Now, you do get, that money does go towards something, of course. So CIE provides pre-departure support. They provide an orientation that includes 7 nights of hotel. They help you out with a visa and find housing and offer support throughout your entire experience there. So you are paying for something. I was just at a point in my life after I graduated that I didn't want to pay that money. A lot of people went through CIEE and had an absolutely great experience. And that their whole application is in English as well. So so that could have an effect, but just know that it does cost a lot of money. In my opinion, I guess it costed quite a bit of money for the value that they were providing, but they do a wonderful job. Another thing, CIE places in Madrid only. And when I say Madrid, this isn't just the city Madrid. Madrid is also its own province. So there is like Greater Madrid. So you can be placed, anywhere from like the center of the city to an hour and a half outside the city. So it's a pretty big area, but CIE only places there. And then the Spanish government, as I mentioned, places all over Spain. You are on your own if you apply for the Spanish government to figure out, as Phil mentioned, the visa process is very, very difficult. So you're on your own for that. Of course, the International Center does provide help with it, but you kind of have to figure everything out yourself. So if you're the type of person who is confident in your Spanish level and thinks you can do it, then by all means go for it. But just know that there might be some difficulties along the way since you aren't getting that same level of support. Both include insurance. I've already mentioned about the application. CIE's application also does cost $50, whereas the Spanish government one costs nothing. And then the Spanish government's application actually isn't open yet. It typically opens in January. They haven't updated on their website, which isn't really a surprise. They tend to move a little bit slower. But their deadline tends to be around April 15th. It can vary and it can sometimes get pushed back as well. So they can be pretty flexible with application deadlines, but just know that the earlier you apply, the higher chance that you'll get your first regional preference and your first preference in type of or like school level. And CIEE's application deadline is open now, and it is March 1st, and that's more of a firm deadline. All right, so just briefly, I'll just go through some pros and cons of being in Madrid versus being in not Madrid. Yeah, Madrid is a very international city, which is awesome in the sense of meeting people from all over and just having access to all these different, foods and people and museums and different types of places. But the likelihood of English being spoken or meeting people who speak English there is much higher. So it's definitely a less immersive experience. But I do want, especially for someone who did live in Madrid, I do want to emphasize that there still are opportunities for immersion. Madrid does have, kind of like New York or something. It has, each individual neighborhood has its own culture, and there are certain neighborhoods that are more authentically Spanish than others. So there are still opportunities for immersion if you want to seek them out. Although Madrid is a big city, 6 million people, there are more rural areas or suburbs of Madrid that you can be placed in. So you won't, as I mentioned, you won't necessarily be placed in the center of the city. You can be placed more on the outskirts. Yeah, as a big city, of course, Madrid has parks, museums, restaurants, bars, nightlife, a lot of things that other big cities have. If travel is something that is important to you, one benefit of being in Madrid is that travel is much more affordable and accessible just because, there's an international airport there. There are many train stations. There are bus stations. So, and since there is so much more supply, the cost of all that is more affordable, and you have access to go to many different places throughout Spain and throughout Europe. And then, of course, it's reflected in the salary that you get paid. But Madrid is definitely more expensive. So yeah, rent, food, just any type of activity will be higher. And then, so I just called the next section not Madrid, because this is pretty much any region outside of Madrid. As you can see, I try to include pictures of things that that Madrid doesn't have or isn't known for. So Madrid is in the middle of the country; it's landlocked, so there's no access to beaches. Madrid is not typically known for its food. Since it is an international city, a lot of like the best chefs from Spain have restaurants in Madrid, but the region of Madrid itself is not known for having like the best cuisine relative to other places in Spain. And then Madrid's also not known for its architecture either. So if any of those things matter to you a lot, you could consider going to places not in Madrid. As I mentioned, outside of Madrid, it's a greater chance for an immersive experience. You can still be placed in urban or rural cities. So just because, you're not going to be in Madrid doesn't necessarily mean that you won't be placed in one of Spain's bigger cities, and it could have similar, attractions that big cities like Madrid would have. But it also could lead to more chances of English being spoken and being less immersive. Outside of Madrid, regional travel is typically more popular because it's not as well connected, I guess, transportation wise. So you can really get to know a region or get to know Spain in general. Trains and buses are a lot more popular than flying, so that could be a huge perk. But if you want to see other places in Europe, for example, or go to Morocco, travel could be more time consuming to get to an airport or a main train station, and that would also lead to more expenses. Yeah, one great thing about being outside of Madrid is that you could really get to know a specific culture. If you do go to Spain, you'll learn that each region of Spain is very, very different. As I mentioned earlier, some even have their own languages, they have their own cuisine, they have their own ways of life. So it's really cool to get to know a completely different culture than maybe what you would have thought by moving to Spain. And without a doubt, outside of Madrid, it's more affordable. But as I mentioned, if you live in a big city, rent could still be kind of high. And if you live more in a rural area, outside of, anywhere outside of Madrid, it could be a lot cheaper. So just some things to consider. Phil, since you're not in Madrid, is there anything else you want to add about pros and cons?
Sure. Yeah, I would definitely agree with the like regional travel aspect. I can't do much travel period right now, even outside of my city, but since I was able to do a little bit the first few weeks I was here. And getting around Andalusia is really easy, really easy. Um, and actually, like I kind of hit the sweet spot. I'm in Algeciras, which is right by Gibraltar. It's about, I want to say, 50 kilometers to the west of Malaga on the southern coast. So it's between Cadiz and Malaga. It's in the province of Cadiz. But yeah, I would, and maybe I can talk about this more with my experience, but from what I've seen so far, placements, there's trade-offs. So like I can go to the beach or I can go on a hike, and there's good food here, here in Andalusia, but in Madrid there would be other benefits. So Yeah, but maybe I can talk about the trade-offs a little more later.
Yeah, we'll get to your experience shortly. So before before that, I just wanted to go over maybe a typical day in the life of an auxiliar.
Jake, actually, before
Yeah.
we get to that, there is a question in the chat
Oh, sure.
pertaining to the difference between maybe living within the city and living without or living outside of it in the commute. Would you be able to address that?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't have the chat up. Yeah, so that's a good question. So a lot of um, so it's basically asking if you're placed in La Comunidad de Madrid, so like the Madrid province versus in the city of Madrid, would you ever be so far that it wouldn't be reasonable to live in the city and commute to work? So it depends on the person. I would say the majority of the people in Madrid specifically always wanted to live in the city because it's so well connected to all of these different regions. Now, I would say so. My first year, I lived with a guy who was another teacher. So he was an American, and he was placed in the Aranjuez, which is the furthest region away from the center of Madrid you could possibly be. And he did have an hour and a half commute, which kind of sucks, but at the same time, he wanted to live in the middle of the city just because he thought he was a city person, and he also used that commute time. It was only one, like once he got to the train station, it went straight there, so he could one, sleep, two, lesson plan for the day, or three, like read and practice Spanish. So he made the most of that time, but I would say generally speaking, people liked being as close to the city as possible. My commute was about 35 minutes, even though it was considered in the middle, or like in Madrid, the Madrid city itself. So like Phil mentioned, there are trade-offs with living close to your school and living in your city. I am a huge proponent of living in a city, but that's just because that's how I myself felt about it. I will also admit that learning, like improving my Spanish wasn't my number one top priority. So I think you just have to prioritize and think about what matters most to you about the experience. It looks like there's a second part of this question. Okay, so yeah, just to add about commuting. So there are three different ways, at least in Madrid, that you will commute to school. One is the metro, and that's usually if you're within the city itself. There are also buses, which there are certain bus routes that are within the city and ones that go outside of the city. And then there's something called the cercanías, which is a commuter train that will go to the outside of the I guess suburbs. So actually, Phil, when you applied, was there a way to request whether or not you want to be in a city or outside of the city?
You can ask, like I wrote additionally, I included like a preference, I think for, um, it was something about my regional preference, but I added like in an extra document, just an extra statement. So you can do that. There's a place to add extra information. I'm not sure how much it's taken into consideration. The second year I've heard it's easier to request a certain city. So, but yeah, that's what I know about it.
Yeah, and I would also recommend if that's something you want, maybe applying as early as possible, and that would increase your chances of getting your request honored. So that's also something to think about. I do see a couple more questions. We'll address them shortly. I just want to get to a couple more things just in case we're shorter on time. So we'll just move on to the next slide. Which is a day in the life of an auxiliar. So typically speaking, your day will be from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. Sorry, there's a typo, but it's or 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. with a 2-hour lunch. Now, I believe that they're trying to phase out the 2-hour lunch. When I was there, I was 9 to 4 with a 2-hour lunch in the middle, which is pretty typical for Spain. But I was also in an elementary school, so it might be school specific, and a lot of schools that are within the city of Madrid still have the 9 to 4 schedule. But for the majority of schools, I believe, are from 9 to 2. And it's kind of you don't stay with the same class every time. You'll rotate to different classrooms, each either 45 minutes to an hour. Depending on the level you're teaching, subjects can include English, social science, natural science, art, and phys ed. Art and phys ed are probably more common for primary levels, whereas at secondary level, English and science are more common. And things that you might do, you might just be there to read and help with, pronunciation, so the students can hear a native English speaker speak. You can, you can also just help assist with any activities that are planned. You can make cultural presentations about yourself, or if there are, especially like holidays from your culture coming up, you might just create a PowerPoint for that. I also did one-on-one help to students who were taking tests, like placement tests. So I would sit with that, like a student, maybe 5 to 10 minutes for that class period, and just give them, that attention that maybe that they haven't been getting in class. So different types of I guess learning methods are possible. It might depend on your specific school how they want to utilize you, because it's ultimately up to them. And then sometimes you'll give private lessons after school. And then I will be sending this presentation to everyone who RSVP'd. So I do want to highlight a couple different blogs, Young Adventurous and Wayfaring Wanderers, of auxiliares that have really detailed their experience, so they can be really, really useful for you to get a better sense of what it's like to be one. And so speaking of that, I'll briefly go over my experience, which I've kind of mentioned throughout, but I was at a primary school for 2 years in southeastern Madrid. I taught grades 1 through 6 within each year, both years. And so basically every hour I would be with a different class. For my school, there were 3 other auxiliares, and one year there was someone from Ireland, and another year there was someone from the UK. So it wasn't just Americans. So it was interesting to meet people from, countries different from my own as well. I mentioned that in my free time, I played in a basketball league, which was awesome to do. And there are definitely opportunities to join soccer leagues as well. I would say those are the 2 biggest sports there in Spain. As I mentioned, I was a history major, so I volunteered at a museum. It was called the Museum of the Americas in Madrid. So that was a great experience too. I also gave private lessons, maybe like 5 hours a week as well. So just to make additional money. You can see in the bottom of my pictures that, or in the bottom of the slide, some pictures that I've done. I definitely had time to do additional traveling, so highly recommended if you go, and if that's hopefully possible by next year. And yeah, it's a great opportunity for networking. I'm still in touch with people I met from my school in Spain, as well as people from countries all over that I met in Madrid, and Americans that I taught with as well. So it's just an awesome experience overall, and I want to stress again that it really exposed me to a whole different career path in international education, and it's why I'm in the position I am now. All right, so now we'll have Phil talk about his experience.
All right, yeah. So I've only been here for about 7 weeks, so I'm still getting my footing in a lot of ways, but I'll definitely go over the basics. Yeah, I'm in the province of Cadiz, in Andalusia. I'm working in a city called Los Barrios, and it's a pueblo. It's a larger pueblo, so it's about 30,000 people. I work there, and then I live in Algeciras, which is a bigger city. It's a port city right by Gibraltar. And I was going to put this in the chat, but my commute's only about 25 minutes by bus. But I've also found some teachers who live in my city and commute, so it's about 15 minutes in the morning. I teach secondary school, levels 1 through 4. So it's about, so far I've only been with like the 3rd and 4th year in secondary school. So between 14 and 16. And so far I've been in like a geography class, physical education class, and English classes. This year it's unique for the whole education system here in Spain as it is in the US. So there's a lot of new restrictions due to COVID. So I'm only in the classroom 1 hour a day right now, but I still have to be at my school for 3 hours, which is it's okay. And the only thing is I prepare for about an hour, and then I have another hour of class, and then I have 1 more hour to stay at the school. So it can be a little bit, I wish I was in the classroom more is what I'll say. But I mean, I'm trying to make the best of it. And I wrote down a few pros of it, of just being here so far. And even with COVID, it's been challenging, but it's still meeting my expectations of, I'm getting paid to live and work abroad, which is something I wanted. I'm getting some teaching opportunities. They're limited. But I as well am doing some private classes once a week. The Cambridge language exam is very popular over here, so there's some prep classes for that. So I'm doing some private tutoring towards that test. And again, I studied anthropology and Spanish, so I don't have much teaching experience, but just being able to converse in English over here is such a big advantage for people, because people, they want to learn English, and they want to practice through conversation. So it comes very naturally. Outside of teaching, I've been able to, so right now they just actually today tightened the restrictions. I can't leave my city, Algeciras, except to go to work to Los Barrios, or I'm not supposed to. And it seems like most people are staying in place. And this is just for the next 2 weeks. But restrictions are kind of tight right now, so I can't do a lot of traveling. The first couple weeks I was here, I was able to do some regionally in Andalusia. Like I went to Malaga, to the beach. I went on a hike near my city. I went to there's like the southernmost point in Europe where you can take the ferry to Morocco. I went to that. It's a really cool beach town. So I've been doing that. And the language immersion is another pro. Like that was one of my main goals of being here, and I've tried to. It's going pretty well so far. I'll say. Like I've met a lot of young teachers at my school. I'm living with a Spanish student. He's a student here at the University of Cadiz. And that's one tip I have for finding, or if you want an immersive experience and finding Spanish roommates, at least for me, is if there's a university nearby, there's usually a university like housing website. And technically, I have a student visa, so I'm usually able to find other students pretty easily, as students here at Spanish universities. So, and how has COVID affected my work? I've talked about that a little bit, but I would just say I think this is the worst. Not I shouldn't say worst, but it's the most. It's the year where the most things are going to be changing about the education system and stuff like that. So they're still trying to figure it out here, as it seems a lot of places in the U.S. are as well. So just being flexible right now has been huge for me, and adjusting my expectations, and because COVID has affected kind of every aspect, but there's a sense here that we're kind of all in it together. And I've only it's been a positive experience here so far, even with COVID. So I hope that answered some questions.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Yeah, and that kind of leads to the next slide about COVID-19's impact on the program right now. And yeah, Phil, you went over some of these points already. But it seems like the Spanish government has been very communicative about what's going on, and understanding if there are any travel hurdles or things unforeseen things that come up. So that's noteworthy. And even the fact that the program is still running during this time, I guess you can be it's safe to assume that by this time next year it'll still be going. Just want to confirm, Phil, I did hear that you needed to prove that you tested negative for COVID before flying to Spain. Is that true?
That was told to me by the airlines.
Okay.
And I actually took 2 tests before I came. But I flew into Paris, and I didn't have to show anything, but that was just my experience. The airline did recommend it though.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and as Phil mentioned, there is a curfew. I believe his is 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. So it can vary by individual region. And of course, Phil's experience might not be the same for all auxiliares, so it might depend on the school and the region that you're living in. And then, what's most important, especially since this is, you may be interested in fall 2021 travel for this program, is that things can and probably will change. So don't be discouraged about what's going on now. And things can significantly change moving forward. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so now we'll get to the questions. So the first one I want to address is from Ryan, and he said, could you talk more about the process of finding housing, especially if you would like to live with locals and maximize Spanish immersion? I'm a little bit more removed from this, so do you have any finding housing advice, Phil?
Yeah, So there's a couple of ways to do it, especially if you're not in a, have a feeling like in big cities, it's easier for auxiliaries to kind of group together. Um, and where I am, I think there's, from what I know, there's about 6 or 7 auxiliaries, and a few of them live together, but most of us live with someone from Spain. I live with a student at the University of Cadiz here, and I know a couple other people who are doing the same. But there's a couple of websites. Mil Anuncios is one, which is kind of like Craigslist, but more like it's more secure. You have to get verified, and so I found my roommate that way. It's very reliable, and on the Facebook groups, people talk about it a lot too. I would say I reached out to my coordinator. So once you get an assignment, you get a you should be in touch with a coordinator, and they can help you find housing. Mine sent me several suggestions for apartments. They can also connect you with teachers at the school. So those are the 2 things that I have.
Cool. Thank you, Phil. Next is, do you have to pay American taxes on the money you earn in Spain? So that is a great question. I did not. I definitely did not. You technically, the way it works is you get paid via stipend, and it's not a salary. And that's why you can get a student visa over rather than like a worker's visa. I actually don't know anyone who did pay American taxes. To be honest with you, I don't know if technically we are supposed to be doing that. Do you know, Phil?
I don't know. I've heard it both ways actually, so I don't know the definitive answer.
Okay. Also, do you need to open a Spanish bank account / credit card to receive payment and use the money in Spain? You don't need a credit card, but you definitely need a Spanish bank account. So that is one of the first things we recommend doing is, yeah, opening a Spanish bank account. And Phil, how was the opening a bank account process for you? All right.
It was okay for me. I was looking around in the Facebook groups, and there's it's a European bank. I think it's actually a German company, but it's accepted all around the EU. It's called N26. And I was a little skeptical at first, but it's been great so far. They send you basically everything you need electronically. There's an app, there's a website. I've had to get a document, so their support's been good. So I recommend that. But there's there's a lot of advice on the Facebook groups, and it's really not that hard, especially once you're here.
Yeah. And just to be 100% clear, you get paid via direct deposit, so that's why a bank account is necessary. All right, next question. Are there regions in which individuals are more likely to get placed, even if you do not have preference in Madrid? Do you have a higher chance of getting placed there because they have higher numbers? There definitely are regions. So Madrid is probably the most likely region. Andalusia might be second most, just because in terms of sheer numbers, that's where placements are. But let's see. I think it's if you don't want to be in Madrid and don't put it in your top 3, then you probably it's unlikely that you would get placed in Madrid if it's not in your top 3 preferences. Just know that, and this leads to a question below: how competitive is the program generally? That it might be advantageous, especially if you're applying later, like closer to the application deadline. It might be advantageous to apply to Madrid as like your 3rd choice, just to be safe or something like that. But in general, I would say it's not that competitive of a program. I maybe, at least when I was there, do you have anything to add about the competitiveness, Phil?
No, yeah, I can speak a little bit to my experiences. If you meet the requirements, it's pretty likely you'll get a placement, especially if you apply early. I applied, I think, 2 weeks after the application opened, and I got my top choice. I wanted Andalusia, I wanted a secondary school. So especially if you apply early, it's pretty likely that you'll be accepted.
And that goes for CIEE and the Spanish government program. There are a limited number of spots in CIE, but since they do place in Madrid, there are quite a few spots open. And if you're thinking that route, you can, I would recommend contacting them directly, and they could probably give you a better estimate about the level of competitiveness. Okay, so it is 1 o'clock, so I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention. If there are any more questions, we can hang out for a little bit longer. So yeah, thank you for all the questions, really good ones. Feel free to include them in the chat or unmute yourselves and just say them if you have any additional questions.